led by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm, of course, Reginald Keenan, along with Wendell Hall. We chair the HRS committee together. Mr. Chair, we have one for action, then we have one for discussion, but the first action item would be from, I think, is Ryan going to do that? It's for approval of proposed interscholastic athletics rules. And we've been talking about it in the past, so go ahead.
Hello again, everyone. Here to present an update on the interscholastic athletic rules. These were first presented at the board's meeting back in May down at UNC Charlotte for discussion. Proposed additions to expansions of the board's interscholastic athletic rules in order to more comprehensively capture the various requirements for student participation in interscholastic athletics at the high school and middle school level. So since that original discussion in May, our office, members of the board, and other folks in DPI staff have been working with representatives from the High School Athletic Association to continue to develop these rules, to update them from the original draft that you reviewed back in May. The documents that you have include changes to the proposed rules, and those are intended to reflect conversations with the various stakeholders in this process, as well as recent legislation that's been enacted by the General Assembly. These are being presented to the board with a recommendation that the board approve them as proposed rules for permanent rulemaking. So this will go through the longer permanent rulemaking process, assuming that it is approved by the state board. So we will initiate that process upon approval. You have two versions of each of the documents, or most of the documents, most of the rules that you have. One is a clean copy that reflects the actual text we proposed. The other shows a markup reflecting changes from what's been made since May. The text can be a little challenging to navigate because it's a draft of showing what's being changed from the existing rules, but the text in blue shows what has been modified since the original proposals back in May, so hopefully that clarifies specific changes that have been made. So Dr. Peach Martin, we're going to go through these one at a time, and I'm just going to highlight a few specifics. 16 NCAC 06E.0201, this is a definitions section that is an expired rule that's proposed for readoption with changes. Since May, the only change is adding a definition of interscholastic athletics, primarily clarifying that it involves competition between schools. It does not refer to any sort of internal things within a school like intramural or recreational sports. The next one is Rule 204. Again, this is the existing rule that the state board has that has most of the requirements related to athletics. It is being reduced specifically to focus on administering organizations. Some changes since May. There's been language added to clarify the statutory requirement that DPI assumes responsibility for high school athletics if no MOU is reached with an administering organization. Also clarifying that the appeals board, independent appeals board, has remand authority to send something back to an administering organization if additional evidence comes forth in the appeals process. That's happened a couple times over the past year, and so looking for clear authority to make sure the appeals board can do that. Rule 205, this is a rule that had been on the books. It's required specifically by statute, dealing with concussion safety and emergency plans. This was one of the rules that was temporarily given authority after the 2018 Supreme Court decision, but it was never went through the full permanent rulemaking process and expired. So the proposal here is that this be readopted. This was not presented at the May meeting, but we discovered it in the course of our continued review, and it's just proposed for readoption. Nothing is different from the rule that was on the books before, except for a few small technical changes. Rule 206, this is the only other rule that is currently in the state board's approved rules. It has to do with athletic trainers. Again, this is based on statutory requirements. Was not presented in May, and the only changes that are being proposed is to make a few small technical changes, clarifying that it applies to all public school units, not just LEAs, and that's consistent with the 2021 legislation that extended those requirements to all public school units. Finally, well, not finally, but the next one is 207. This is the largest addition and specifically addresses all of the eligibility requirements for participation in high school athletics. A few things to highlight here from the changes. One is that the proposed draft has removed any position on the gender eligibility requirements. As I think everyone here knows, the General Assembly recently enacted Session Law 2023-109 over the governor's veto. The law is quite explicit in terms of the requirements related to students' participation in high school sports based on, in interscholastic athletics based on gender. There is a requirement that the state board report those, or monitor and report violations to the Joint Legislative Commission on Government Operations, but doesn't require rules to this effect. And so the recommendation is that the board not address this matter, since the law is fairly explicit and rules are not supposed to repeat what is stated in statute. Next matter, updated scholastic requirements. If you may recall, back in May, the proposal was to delegate to the public school units the requirement to adopt policies for good academic standing. Following conversations with the Athletic Association, the proposal is now to have a statewide standard rather than delegating that to local school districts. It is being modified from what is currently on the books, or is recommended for modification, that the new requirement be that students pass at least 70% of courses taken in the preceding semester, and that the student must be on track to advance to the next grade level or to graduate within the next calendar year. Originally this said at the end of the current school year, but the Athletic Association pointed out that some students transfer in mid-year from other institutions. So in conversations, the hope is that this will address some of the issues that have come to light through the appeals process of high-performing students not meeting the technical requirements of the existing rule, while still ensuring students that would have been eligible under the old rule would continue to be so. Another update is that there's been an update to the felony rule to remove ineligibility based on proceedings in juvenile court. We ran into this issue actually earlier this year because the records of juvenile court are not public. That creates an evidentiary issue for for administering organizations and the appeals board to try to enforce that rule, and may not be in the best interest of students participating in the juvenile justice system to have that. So it's recommended that that be taken out and focus just on felonies in adult court. And then the last addition to this rule is it clarifies the circumstances under which an administering organization can or must waive the application of the eligibility rule. Previously, this was within the delegated authority to the administering organization, but it was phrased rather obliquely and has created some challenges through the appeals process, and so the recommendation is that it be written in more explicit terms under the eligibility rule itself. The next one is 208. This was the penalties rule. There's no change from the May draft. It's simply take the existing penalty rules that are in the current state board rule and puts them in their own separate rule. And then lastly, 210. This is something of a technical addition that was not originally presented in May, but there is part of the statute that requires there to be rules related to how to report violations or issues related to the implementation of these rules. And it simply states the process for reporting rule violations in order to comply with that statutory requirement. So those are the changes that have been made. These are being recommended for the state board's approval so that they can initiate the permanent rulemaking process.
Any questions, comments from the floor?
Mr. Chairman, may I make a quick comment?
Please do.
Thank you, sir. I just want to say openly to Attorney Ryan and to Allison, they have done a heck of a fine job, believe me, in taking these rules and trying to satisfy the interests of all, especially looking at the high school athletic association and those student athletes. They've done an outstanding job. You just couldn't ask for any better work coming from the legal minds. Wish I could give you my legal mind, but because we got this far, I want to say it openly to the board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we go to discussion item. I think Dr. Essex is going to talk about the whole child NC Advisory Committee recommendations. Dr. Essex?
Good afternoon, and thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Suzanne Schmall, who is our school health policy and partnerships consultant.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Suzanne Schmall. I'm part of the NC Healthy Schools team that supports Whole Child NC Advisory Committee, and I'm really excited today to be here before you to share their update and their recommendations. And just as a reminder or a refresher for those of you that might be newer, This committee was established in 2015, and it is to make recommendations to the North Carolina State Board of Education on the non-academic barriers to student success, such as poverty, safety, health, and others. This group is a bit of a reimagined group. While it was established in 2015, it was kind of reimagined about a year ago. The vision was initially developed as part of the Education Commission of the State's Policy Academy in the summer of 2022, and that vision was refined with committee's input and buy-in and revisions to that. So that you see that there. And then we thought it was really important, or the group thought it was really important, to show the diverse makeup of the members. You've all seen that as part of the policy, but just as a reminder, there is a strong committee that brings a lot of expertise and commitment to this work, and the foundation being the local implementation and kind of the reality check for the group. And that includes our Teacher of the Year, Eugenia Floyd, and Principal of the Year, Dr. Patrick Green, who always helps to keep folks in check, and then also a local superintendent and our Specialized Instructional Support Personnel Administrator as well, and a local medical professional. Other committee members that serve in advocacy roles, such as NC Child and the North Carolina Child Fatality Task Force. Family and community engagement expertise is brought by the North Carolina Parent-Teacher Association and the North Carolina Alliance of YMCAs. Education sector you see represented there by several different organizations. Safety with the North Carolina Center for Safer Schools and Juvenile Justice, and public health and policy experts as well. And this is a bit of an oversimplification of their expertise. Obviously, there's a lot of crossover with that expertise, and they bring a lot more than this, but it just shows a little bit of the breadth of the expertise that is represented there. And this group has accomplished a tremendous amount this past year. As mentioned previously, the Education Commission of the State's Policy Academy really helped to re-energize the group. Thanks, Jeff. And we were very fortunate to have their staff that helped really this past year as part of being the facilitators for this work. They still continue to be engaged virtually and support the work from afar, but it's been great to have them engaged as part of this work. Then advisory committees members were invited again last summer. And to align with the policy roles. And then folks who were invited to that meeting then helped us identify additional members who may have not been at the table, who people thought were important to be part of those conversations. And then obviously refining the policy and revising that policy to reflect those membership roles. The group then identified the chair and co-chairs. You see here Dr. Charlene Wong was the previous chair. She got snagged by the CDC. And then Dr. Patrick Green and Dr. Kathy Colville, who recently received her completed her dissertation. So I'll be sure if she's listening to make sure I reference her as Dr. Colville, are our co-chairs. And the group completed the vision again with input from everyone, and the bylaws with Ryan and Allison's support and help. And then again, the policy was updated to be more streamlined and better reflect the roles that were represented. So we're very excited. So I mentioned Dr. Charlene Wong got snagged, but we're very excited that Kella Hatcher was nominated and approved as the new chair at the August meeting, so very recently. You may be familiar with Kella from her role with the North Carolina Child Fatality Task Force, and she brings a lot of personal and professional commitment and passion, and we'll welcome her to share a little bit about herself.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm really pleased to be here today representing the Whole Child NC Advisory Committee. So I have been serving on this committee for about a year, and I wanted to share with you a little bit of perspective about the work of this committee, besides the fantastic team of support that Suzanne and Ellen and all bring. As you saw earlier on the slide that Suzanne showed you, the composition of committee membership in terms of the areas of expertise and the organizations represented is extremely well-rounded and really rich in terms of looking at those non-academic barriers that kids face in getting the best possible education. And it feels like when we're in meetings where somebody's area of expertise drops off, another member's picks up, and we're able to have really rich discussions that where we feel like we can truly look at what will make a difference for kids. Something that the committee members share in abundance, and that really spoke to me in the first meeting that we had, is their passion for finding ways to better support kids. They all care deeply, and the way that that really translates in our meetings is they are not shy to offer opinions. They are not shy to ask questions and really get down to work at arriving at solutions. With the varying backgrounds of these members, it's been really interesting and affirming to me to see just how aligned these members were in identifying this year's top priority, which you're going to hear more about in a moment. And that relates to addressing the need for more school nurses, social workers, and counselors and psychologists in our schools. You'll hear a lot more about this in a minute from Suzanne, but members easily agreed that these professionals are at the core of addressing many of these issues that are keeping kids from doing their best in school, and yet we don't have nearly enough of them to appropriately address their needs. No, we don't expect them to work miracles, but they have such an important role in identifying and recognizing an issue that a child may be facing and connecting that child to, or their family, to needed resources within or outside the school system. The Whole Child NC Advisory Committee is aware that you all, as a board, have in the past also recognized the need for more of these professionals. And we hope that this board will continue to find that this is an important area of focus. And with that, I will thank you for your time and turn it back over to Suzanne.
Kella is another brilliant legal mind that was referenced earlier, brings a lot of good analytical skills to the group as well, so thanks, Kella. And then continuing on the progress of this committee and the hard work that they've completed this past year, there's been 5 meetings to date since last September of 2022, and the group has identified their priorities and for the year and beyond. You'll hear a little bit about those in a minute. This obviously required a lot of discussion, post-it notes, summaries, and revisiting earlier conversations as well. Those priorities that we're going to be talking about today, the one that we're really going to focus in on is that top one you see there, endorsing the funding request for specialized instructional support personnel. That's really what this conversation is about today and the recommendations. But just to give you an overview of recommendations and areas that the board, that the advisory committee would like to bring before you in future meetings, includes policy recommendations around infrastructure support for whole child NC and the whole school, whole community, whole child model, as well as policy recommendations around principal preparation programs and the integration of WISC, or whole school, whole community, whole child, as part of that preparation programs, so that our principals are better prepared to address those non-academic barriers. And then lastly, you see that expanding school-based health services, health access to health services, and that's obviously a very broad one, and the group's going to have to hone in a little bit more and clarify what exactly that is. But that's a broader one, a more long-term one. The work of this committee and the priorities are very aligned with the Portrait of a Graduate, the State Board of Education Strategic Plan, and Operation Polaris, particularly the Student Support Services, and the Human Capital priorities as well. And we know the North Carolina Youth Risk Behavior Survey data has been brought to you before, but I'm going to hit a couple highlights just to, that are very relevant to the recommendation that's being brought to you today. So that it's one you see here is the trend of North Carolina high school students from 2011 to 2021, and it has dipped quite a bit on this one for from 80 to 49% of students that feel good about themselves. Again, that's our North Carolina high school students. Next slide is the percentages have gone up for students who feel very alone in their life. You can see that trend going up. Then up for students who feel sad or hopeless. And then again, I know you've seen this, so we'll hit some of the highlights here, but the news is not good, obviously. Our students are seriously considering attempting suicide, making a plan, and attempting suicide at higher rates than they ever have. You'll see in 2021 here that 22% of the overall student population considered suicide, so that's more than 1 in 5 students. That means likely all of us know somebody, love somebody that's impacted by this data. There's faces behind this, as you all know. And again, we know these rates are even higher for our students who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. And the rates are also trending way up for our females, which is the blue line on here that you see, or the blue image that you see on here, from 15% in 2011 to 30% in 2021. Males are not doing good either at 14%, but what is causing our females to consider suicide at twice the rate as our males? There's a lot on this slide. I'll break it down pretty briefly, but it's basically you see here 34% of the total population reported that their mental health was not good. Again, females at a pretty high rate at 46%, males at 21%, and then you can see there are higher rates in the grades, all grades, but particularly 12th grade. And then white students are reporting higher rates as well. Again, our gay, lesbian, bisexual students are reporting at higher rates of not having good mental health. And this is not necessarily due to their identity, but again, the likely acceptance of whether it's in the home, school, community, elsewhere. And then you likely are all very familiar with this, but the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Hospital Association declared a national emergency in adolescent mental health in 2021. We're nowhere near out of that yet, and the Surgeon General as well, U.S. Surgeon General, made youth mental health a key priority, with the importance of CISP, or Specialized Instructional Support Personnel, being noted in the report, and expanding the number of these professionals, and was among the variety of prevention strategies identified. And then again, in North Carolina, we're not doing so great. The North Carolina Child Health Report Card from 2023 that's published by the North Carolina Institute of Medicine and the NC Child gave the state an F for child mental health and cited that these trends are worsening and that we're failing to meet the increased needs of mental health needs of our students. And this slide really shows, I think, one, that we're not dedicating enough for per pupil spending. We're not doing great in mental health, rate 42nd, meeting the needs of mental health needs of our students. But what's interesting also is you'll see on this map that the districts, counties noted in red have no child and adolescent psychiatrists. So even if our specialized instructional support personnel are in place, where do they refer these students to? We have a major shortage of mental health providers. And then just again, from the North Carolina report card, we know that 1 in 5 adolescents has seriously considered attempting suicide, 1 in 10 has made a suicide attempt, and more than 1 in 10 children aged 3 to 17 has a diagnosis of anxiety or depression. There are resources in North Carolina, we know that, but they're not enough. We have the 988 Suicide Lifeline, where students can go for support. But again, where do they go for more intensive follow-up? And as you all likely know, we're not near the national recommendations for specialized instructional support personnel ratios, especially for our school social workers and our school psychologists, not even at a quarter of the recommendation for school social workers. We all know that there is an importance of a solid team in this work. It's not about these individual roles. It is really about the team-based approach of these professionals. They all provide very complementary supports and their own specialized services. And you also have an overview of these roles and specific duties in their education at the table with you that provides an overview of that more in depth that you can take a look at. We know that having CISP in our school supports graduation rates, instruction time, reading and math achievement, school safety, and access to medical and mental health services such as chronic conditions like asthma and diabetes, as well as suicide prevention. And they have a positive impact on our chronic absenteeism, physical aggression, substance use prevention, and teacher turnover rates as well. Investments in CISP our specialized instructional support personnel has been endorsed by the North Carolina State Board of Education, by you all. Thank you so much. The North Carolina State Superintendent, thank you. North Carolina Center for Safer Schools, North Carolina Parent-Teacher Association, and the North Carolina Child Fatality Task Force, among some. There are others as well, but this is clearly a huge need that is recommended by many and all. Again, we know you all know the importance of these roles and the adequate funded needed, emphasis on adequate funded needed, as the State Board of Education and the governor's budget included these important services and recommendations. And we strongly encourage you to keep raising the importance of these roles, all of them. Again, that team-based approach, addressing the need for competitive salaries and permitting districts flexibility to determine which roles they need to hire. And now, I think a couple of our committee members are going to come up to the mic to share from their perspectives. Jill Cox, who is the Communities and School President and CEO, has joined us today and is also part of our committee, or the whole Child and C Committee.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks to all of you for the work that you do for North Carolina's children every day. As president and CEO for Communities and Schools of North Carolina, I also co-chair the Child Fatality Task Force and sit on the committee that we're here representing today. And it's my pleasure to share some brief comments with you in support of the recommendations that you've heard. Communities and Schools has long been an in-school side-by-side partner with schools and with the districts we serve, and with the parents and the students we serve. Those we serve are often students in families of low income and great need. And they graduate 97% of the time, and we are really proud of that. As you can see from our slide, the next one, as you can see from our slide, we have a student success formula. And it closely aligns to the work of the Whole Child NC Committee. It also aligns to Johns Hopkins predictors of student success by focusing on wraparound supports for the whole child and the family to drive student success. We know that positive relationships are the fundamental building block for success for our students. You all know and have seen that research consistently shows that if a student has relationships in the school building, they increase their engagement and have better academic outcomes. The specialized instructional support personnel recommendation that you have heard from the committee today speaks to the results of the Youth Risky Behavior Student Survey. It places more individuals in schools with specialized training to help mitigate and lessen mental health risks. If we can mitigate and lessen those risks, we can produce a safer setting for our students, our staff, our communities, and we can support increased and improved school climate. CIS staff often fill the gaps in these services in communities where we're fortunate enough to serve by providing wraparound students that help students develop coping skills, conflict resolution, self-advocacy skills, very similar often to the work of social workers. Our staff in high schools help students complete the FAFSA, provide exposure to college and career opportunities, and teach durable skills like those outlined in the portrait of a graduate, very similar to the work that our counselors do. Based on our experience, we know the needs in these areas are great, and our districts are each very individual and quite different. Providing additional investment in specialized instructional support personnel is critical, but it is equally important for that funding to be flexible. We've seen through some recent investment in COVID relief funds that when we provide districts the opportunity to choose how they invest these funds, they can more greatly meet the needs of the students in the districts that they are in. Each district has different levels of personnel, as you well know. Each district has different levels of need, as you also well know. And giving flexibility allows us to help the districts meet the needs of their students and families more closely. Communities and Schools continues to leverage evidence-based practices, the power of relationships, and engagement with the community to rally around our schools and our students. We look forward to continuing our journey and our work together, and we thank you for your consideration of our recommendations today. Thank you.
Maybe I can just do it here. Well, while we're waiting, so next is Dr. Patrick Green, who's going to share from Green Central High School.
Yay, we know him.
So, thank you for including me. I'll admit that when Dr. Preachy Martin asked me to be on this committee, I was a little bit confused when I looked at the makeup and felt incredibly inadequate to be in the presence of so many healthcare professionals and mental health providers. But I was very welcomed into the group and got to meet all the other people who want kids to do well in school and be healthy in school. And I applaud the work that they've been doing. Everyone knows, if you've been an educator for a little while, you've probably heard the phrase, you have to Maslow before you can bloom. And that truly is the work that is done on this committee with so many people who are interested in making sure that kids' basic needs are met so that they can come and sit in classrooms and achieve and do well. And I think it's so appropriate that we're hearing about these students and their needs on a day when we're also talking about student achievement data, and a day we're also talking about graduation cohort data, because those two things are always going to be tied to one another. This has been incredible work over the past year. I've been thrilled to be a part of it and look forward to doing so much more of the work that is yet to come. And we genuinely hope that the policy recommendations that come from this committee are taken with the utmost sincerity and given all the attention that we can give it, because our schools and our students need it. Thank you.
Obviously, amazing committee members. This is just a handful of them. All of them are fabulous, but we really appreciate the dedication and work they put into all of this. The ones that couldn't be here today did want to share a few of them, not all of them, some quotes. I won't read all of these word for word because you have access to them, but I did want to highlight a few points from some of them. Obviously, again, the North Carolina PTA is represented on this, and you can see there again that she commented on when these priorities, meaning mental health and wellness, are met, we will produce students who are healthier and more equipped to navigate our complex society. Sharif Axton Vodica, who's with the North Carolina Alliance of YMCAs, commented again on the need for proper resources and the needs that are being seen in these students every single day, day in and day out. Again, Kathy Colville, who is with the North Carolina Institute of Medicine, took a more personal approach, but really highlighted that spotting concerns early is really important so that we can take action to support our students. And then Natasha Scott, who is an administrator with Cumberland County Schools over specialized instructional support personnel, really commented on the need for infrastructures like Whole Child NC to look at things in a systemic way and talk about the resources needed, and again, provide students with the services they need when they need them and where they need them. Dr. Odusanya from Department of Health and Human Services commented again on the need for adequate funding for our specialized instructional support personnel. And then last but not least, we heard from one of our educator prep faculty and talked about the need to go upstream and really go upstream and not keep going downstream and not addressing the root causes and providing preventative resources and addressing these root causes and the importance of that. So our students and families and staff can enjoy lifelong success and well-being. And again, we applaud all of you in here for your continued support of specialized instructional support personnel and the budget request, and implore you to keep this at the forefront and keep in mind the needs of our students and families and how we can strengthen our specialized instructional support personnel ratios in North Carolina, provide adequate funding to fill these roles, and offer competitive salaries so that retain competent staff in these roles. Again, we thank you for your time and look forward to coming before you over again and again this next year and onward, and regarding the priorities and recommendations of the Whole Child NC Advisory Committee. But I'll pause here and see what questions or comments folks have, and I may be calling on some of our colleagues in case you ask some more specialized comments about staff.
Questions, comments, I think, Vice Chair? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Chair Keenan. Thank you for highlighting and lifting up the need for social workers and other health professionals. It's something that we as a board very much appreciate. The information you bring is thorough, meaningful, and helpful as we continue to request in budgetary matters and other ways to try to provide further support to our students to that need. One question to go with that is, where are we at this point with the ability to move forward with a youth risk behavior survey, which has been so important to our efforts in the past, to do so with some level of fidelity and sufficient thoroughness? Do we have a status report on that?
That's a great question. I might call on either Dr. Essick or Les
I asked because you mentioned it was a source of very important information during your
I
presentation.
appreciate the question.
So at the current moment, according to Senate Bill 49, it will change how we do the youth risk behavior survey and will require active permission only, which we know is sometimes a challenge to get kids to take home permission slips and bring them back. So it can have a pretty devastating effect on our ability to collect this data based on that legislation in the next cycle, which will be 2025.
Yep, Kim?
Earlier we had a conversation about the significant issue that chronic absenteeism is presenting for our students, and we were talking about it in terms of test scores, but we were all, I think, in agreement that this was a very significant problem. So I have to just point out that these are the folks who could have an impact on that chronic absenteeism. my comment when we were talking about it, I was thinking, you've got to give districts resources to address that problem. They don't necessarily have them in place, and this goes to that issue.
Thank you so much for lifting that up. I was actually at my desk listening to y'all when y'all were talking about that, and I appreciate you lifting up that point.
Okay.
So, I think there is another, I think there's a little, I'm trying to get some more information right now. I think there is a provision that's going to make it more possible for us to collect the youth risk behavior survey data that we're working on right now, and hopefully we can get this to the board before the end of the meeting. My question has to do with, well, it's a question and a comment. My comment is that looking at the data that we see frequently and that you've just provided about what's happening with our students' mental health, I'm not so sure that the people that we currently have in FTE identified as SISP folks are the right people to be dealing with the incredible influx of mental health issues that our students have. These folks are not mental health clinicians. And so while they are important, and while it is true that we do not have enough of them, all of these people here have the ability to, as it says across in the handout, refer students to receive further specialized support. And it's that further specialized support that worries me, because school psychologists are not typically in buildings to provide mental health supports. Now, we do have the House Bill 605, the threat assessment legislation, which will hopefully shed light on the fact that we don't have enough mental health clinicians in our schools, because the goal of those teams is to provide those mental health supports in time before something tragic happens. But I'm wondering, what are, if any, what is the committee thinking about in terms of parent engagement resources? Because we cannot, when they refer to mental health, when they refer for further specialized supports, then the onus is on the parent to make sure that their child gets in front of the right mental health clinician, whether it's a psychiatrist, whether it's a primary care physician, a pediatrician. I just want to make sure that we're aligning resources to needs, because I'm sure that we're all, every time I see the mental health data around what our students are telling us, it's a shock. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see that our school nurses are going to be able to make a dent in any of this. It's going to take parent engagement and resources that exist outside of a school. So there has to be that line of communication between these folks and parents.
Absolutely, and I think the committee would agree with you that it's more of a both and, that these folks kind of represent the first line of defense, and connecting folks with resources in their community, making sure they're getting the appropriate counseling on site at school if they need it, connecting to them to local mental health providers if they have them. But I think parents are definitely engaged as part of that process. I know from our specialized instructional support personnel and families, and I think it's more of a both and. You're right. I mean, that map shows we have a critical shortage of mental health providers, but I think these folks provide that key first line of defense when students are coming in, day out to the school sites. And I would encourage anybody else who's on the committee, if they want to add to that.
Well, we need to remember that we not only do we have enough funding, but we don't have enough people to take on these roles in schools, and there could be many reasons why that is, but we need more people to be enrolled and getting credentialed to serve in these programs.
I would just want to comment really quickly to what you said. And earlier in the slides, as a teacher in one of the 3 districts that is mostly sufficiently staffed, I can speak directly to the impact that sufficient student instructional support members have every day. speaking even to teacher retention, when we talk about who is remaining in the classroom and the issues that are driving them out of the classroom. A great deal of teacher turnover is tied to whole child issues. Yes, there are, of course, there are issues specific to teaching, but a great deal comes from having to address or attempting to address whole child issues. And as someone in a district that has prioritized manning our schools in Capital Carver City, I see the difference. When I can, to your point about these people being first line workers, when I can refer a child to my counselor, to a social worker, and it's not necessarily for a referral. I have counselors who come in literally to talk about time management and natural anxiety versus what might be a broader issue, that if we had the people in the building to talk to our kids about managing 6 APs, or do you need 6 APs, or how do you balance scholastic sports we were talking about earlier, with those very small conversations that right now, based on that map, classroom teachers are having to have with between 120 and 150 kids, and trying to keep parents informed, to have adequate staff that I know I can literally take, Ms. Truitt, if you're having an issue in English and it's just not there, I can say, okay, I'm gonna write you a 10-minute note. I'm gonna call counseling and see if somebody can talk to you. That kid is out of my class for 10 minutes out of 50, as opposed to I keep them in class and I try to do these things, and by lunch, they are in a counselor's office, inactive and missing the whole school day. So I absolutely agree with your point that no, I do not want it on my counseling colleagues to have to become mental health interventionists. However, a great deal of what they are trained to do is to support kids so that those don't bloom into larger mental health issues. And as someone in a district that is staffed in that way, I absolutely see the correlation to student achievement, as our data shows, to graduation rates, to attendance, etc. And so in deference to what you said, I absolutely agree with it both and, but as someone speaking from one of the few districts that has made this a priority, it matters. It matters to all of the other things we've talked about today, and there is a direct correlation between staffing and providing that support for teachers and student achievement. So thank you very much for illuminating that for all of us, but I want to speak from experience that yes, it matters, and it's a direct teacher support as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 2 more minutes, and Ms. Dr. Dunn, do you want to say something?
Just a quick comment. What gives me pause, and let me do a little bit of no more than a second or two background on this. I am truly sensitive to the emotional social needs of students. I come out of even though I come out of an academic background, I also come out of Mr. Hall and I had some tenure here many years ago working in the area of student services with the department. We worked in the area of all of these areas. School social work, school nurses, dropout prevention, on and on and on. So we were in that venue of student services work. So I don't want to minimize the importance of personnel, and I certainly do not want to be insensitive to the needs of our students who experience various levels of trauma every day in our classrooms. But at the same time, what gives me pause is when oftentimes we move in these directions. I'm thinking of the Centers for Disease Control, and I would be so concerned that out of this could spring forward curricula that school districts would adopt and attempt to implement. And it could be radicalized curricula. It could be something that our parents are offended, they're offended by it, or families are offended by it. And it goes to the superintendent's point. The next thing you know, you've got classroom teachers needing to do something with adopted curricula. And they are not trained. Before you know it, they're venturing out of their licensure lane. And they are putting on the hat of a therapist. And one thing leads to another. I'm very uncomfortable with, kind of instant movements in certain directions. And it really comes down to how it impacts, what changes. that come about at the school and the classroom level as a result of these very important programs, or very important initiatives. But the unintended consequences give me a lot of pause.
Someone else?
Yes.
Yes, our student.
As someone who is one of the children or young person addressed in our schools, I'm from a county that is definitely short-staffed when it comes to these roles. But I go to a school with a wonderful counselor, and having a student's not going to learn if these whole child issues aren't addressed first, because not knowing how to manage my schoolwork, or not knowing where I can get clothes to wear that day or soap to use at night, without those issues being addressed first, learning's gonna come second. So having people in our schools that are there to deal with the whole child issues, I think is extremely important. And I'm really excited to see this coming up more often, because I think it is an integral part of all the test scores and everything we see and talk about every week or every month. And yeah, I just really hope to see this taken further as we go along.
One last comment for anybody?
We'll see if the mothers will be.
I think that sums up well. We thank you very much for that. Thank the committee for the great work.
I think Mr. Mercer had,
Oh, okay, all right.
I'm sure he'll be brief.
I wanted to share that, in my home county, we have a program we've been using that's effective, and it's, working hand in hand with the social workers, and students are identified when they early in an attendance problem. We go on weekends, we go to the home and find out, you've been coming to school, why aren't you here? Because as we'd said earlier, if you don't have a child in the seat, you're not gonna be able to teach them. And from there, it might go in any direction. It might be clothing, it might be an illness, it might be disorder in the home. And we've tried to deal with it, and we've kept some statistics, which I can't quote, but it was effective. We got a number of students back in school, and they attended regularly. And that made a big difference in those students. And it started out as a reference from a school, one program in the county. If we could have that effect in all the schools, then we would be doing great things. So appreciate what you guys are doing.
Again, thank you everyone for the comments, and Mr. Chair, with that concludes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. If I could add to that last topic, we have for years around this table discussed this issue and seen mountains of data, heard moving comments like we just heard a few minutes ago. This issue will not be dealt with until it becomes a priority of the General Assembly. And so to our parents and our citizens that we serve, we ask for your help in raising this issue up. Not that money solves everything, but clearly we need more resources. And we need more people encouraged to go into these fields outside of our school system to support our students. So it is a multi-pronged effort that has to become a priority for our state. So we would appreciate your help in accomplishing that.
Chairman Davis.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned something that's important to me, and it's not on the whole child, but it's what you're talking about. It appears that statistically true or perceived, only about 30% of teachers vote on election day. And until we get a higher percent, we're not going to have the impact in the legislature that we ought to have.
With that, we'll move to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the ES&P Committee, and joining me in that leadership role is Dr. Donna Tipton Rogers, and thank you so much for sitting in and helping me out a couple of weeks ago in the committee meeting. So a very short agenda this month, one action item, and this item pertains to licensure renewal requirements. It comes in the policy category. It's LICN 005. This is going to be a very quick reminder of what is entailed in this policy, and coming forward is the maestro.
Good afternoon, board members. Very quickly, recap the issues at hand here with LICN 005. This is around licensure renewal. So we're just updating some of the terminology. We have LEA, we're using the more generic PSU. License validation is a question in the field. If someone who holds a continuing license allows that to expire, can they reactivate that license? And the answer is yes, if it's requested by an employing PSU, and if that person had not been employed in the prior fiscal year. So you can't use it as an end run around the continuing ed requirements, but if you left and want to come back, we're always welcoming to you. Next is the continuing education unit update, and this was just taking out old CEU requirements. We had 3 different versions of it. The other 2 have sunset, so we're just including the most current. And then finally, the North Carolina retired employees. The retiree license is going away in favor of the lifetime license, and the requirements for obtaining that license are listed in the policy. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments? Thank you very much. I'm too quick, maybe. Calm down. And the last item is the consent. Thank you, Dr. Tombo. And the last item is a consent item, and this is the annual report from the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This is a consent item, but Dr. Evans has a minute.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. I just have a brief word on behalf of the Pepsi leadership. We would like to thank all the members of Pepsi for the time, energy, and dedication they give to the work of the Commission on behalf of North Carolina's educators and their students. The collective wisdom and thinking of Pepsi is a valuable resource to education in North Carolina, and the importance and volume of their work is reflected in this work. They just wanted to provide a few comments to thank the Pepsi members going with this report.
Absolutely, and thank you, and we appreciate the partnership. That concludes, I have the record of having the shortest committee meeting today, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. That brings us to the Business Operations Committee led by Vice Chair Alan Duncan. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. We have several items on action on first reading, and the first one is BizOp 1, approval of contracts over $500,000.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. We have 4 such contracts before us today. The first one is Identity Automation Contract Renewal, and Dr. Sandberg is ready to go.
Good afternoon. This is a renewal for our contract with Identity Automation. 1 year plus 1 optional year. Identity Automation provides our identity and access management system, NC Ed Cloud, that students and staff across the state use to log in to state and local systems. That service is presently under RFP, so this contract is to allow that process to conclude.
Questions or comments on this? Thank you, Dr. Sandberg. Our second contract is a contract amendment with the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill's Institute for Public Health. I believe Dr. Essick has this.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is an amendment to a current contract we have with the Institute of Public Health. We receive funding from the Division of Health and Human Services and are working to do some mental health training work. And we received some additional ARPA funds to help support the North Carolina School Nurse Conference this year. And so we're amending the contract to include those funds.
Any questions on that? Thank you. And I appreciate people identifying where the funds are coming from, because right now there are enough different funds that you need somewhat of a playbook to keep up with them all. Our third contract is the IES grant. That's a hint on the funding. Assessing the long-term impacts of school extension programs on student re-engagement. Dr. Corn's here for that.
Yes, sir. So this is a federal grant that the department received. Dr. Marr is listed as the principal investigator, wrote a proposal in partnership with the UNC EPIC, which is a public policy shop, does a lot of research with the department. This was awarded, I think, a year and a half ago now, and they actually already have presented to this board on this study. It's really focused on the evaluation of the department's statewide school extension program funded through our ESSER 3 funds. And so they're going to continue to give white paper updates and presentations to the board. We've been working collaboratively with them to make sure that the data they're collecting is getting back into the hands of practitioners. They're actually presenting at the AIM conference this year on this study.
Very good. Any questions for Dr. Corn or comments? All right, that brings us to our fourth contract, leadership training and support in schools identified as low performing. And this contract would be with RTI Leadership Group. And Dr. Martin may take a moment or two longer to describe this contract and the proposed work that would be done under it for a little over $1 million. Welcome, Dr. Martin.
Thank you. This contract, back in March, the state board awarded us ESSER funds to expand the care support. We went to our list of chronically low-performing schools. Out of those 43 districts, 144 schools. This is based on 21-22 accountability data. 19 of those districts we were already serving. We reached out to 21 school districts to provide different options for support. And this contract represents 8 districts saying yes. Those 8 districts represent 37 schools where we will be assigning 12 coaches. These coaches are all retired school leaders. Most of them have a connection to the district that they will be serving. They were actually picked, except for about 2 of them, by their district, and the rest, we had a conversation with RTI International. The contract amount is $1,070,098, and this will provide coaching support not only for principals, but also for their school leadership teams. One thing that I would add about the ratio is a little bit different than what we've been doing in CARES. It actually lowers the ratio. That was a request from our state superintendent. So this will give more one-on-one support for these 8 districts.
All right, questions on this grant? Yes, Ms. Candace.
Could we get a list of the 8 districts?
Sure. I can give you a list of, we gave different coaching options, and I can give you who chose the contract coaches, who chose relay coaches, and who said no thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I think if you can send that to all board members, it's obviously there's interest in that. Dr. Martin?
Sure, will do.
Any other questions or comments on this? This will be important work, so it's an important contract. Thank you.
I do have a
Yes,
quick
Dr.
question
Arzenine.
about and maybe you've mentioned this, Dr. Martin, but my question has to do with these coaches are known for being successful in the field of turning around schools. I would imagine there's a way that you determine that.
Well, these coaches were recommended by the districts for the most part. I had the opportunity to review their resumes. My assistant director and I reviewed data when present. Most of these coaches have served in the capacity as a turnaround principal in the districts that they will be supporting.
Okay. Thank you.
You're pausing here.
I know. You can hear another question.
I hear it.
I haven't heard it yet, but I feel it's out there. Go ahead and ask it.
Will they succeed? Were they successful in their careers?
We have reviewed the data, and based on the data where available, they did turn around a school very similar to the schools that they're being placed in.
Now, the school district will set up the expectations, like not really job descriptions, but what is expected of the coach? I mean, are there some guidelines, benchmarks, goals, objectives?
So RTI International, we've met with them and we talked about what we're currently doing with CARES. Based on what we're currently doing, we did set expectations, number of hours. Of course, that is going to be worked out with finesse and detail as they enter the districts. And so, yes.
And we will keep an eye on it.
They have monthly status reports to the department.
Okay, those are my questions.
All right, and I sense from Dr. Oxendine's questions, the board may want, not maybe perhaps monthly reports, but some follow-up reports as this work starts to get up and going to know how effective it is and how it's working.
I will work with Dr. Petrie Martin.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin.
Yes.
All right, that then brings us to BizOp 2, which is policy amendments. This are allotment policy amendments to the manual in 3 areas. One is generally the replacement school buses, PRCs. The second one is federal grant programs for CDC, improving health, academic achievement, and well-being of students. And the last area is funds related to coronavirus or COVID-19. Their CARES Act Gear 1 funds on specialized instructional support personnel for COVID-19 and supplemental instructional services related to COVID-19. Jennifer Bennett.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. A few quick policy amendments. I warned you last month that you'd be seeing me quite a bit as we start the new year. So the first 2 relate to school bus replacements. We have a new PRC we're going to establish or request to establish to help us provide a direct allocation to school districts. What is taking place now is we have school districts obtaining grant funds and other funding sources to help with the purchase of an e-bus as we move into the more environmental friendly generation. And so they are getting grants, and this would enable us to help provide some supplemental matching funds up to the cost of a replacement bus for them to help them attain these grants. The easiest way for us to process that is through allocation to them. And then we also have just an amendment to the 120 normal school replacement policy to bring that current to general statute and legislation. Provides the reference for the administrative code related to that state term contract we do, and just clarifies the total amount that's available for school bus replacements. So those are the 2 state PRCs that we're requesting be amended. We have a new federal PRC, which we're always happy to have new grant money that we get to create a new PRC. So we have a new CDC grant that has been provided to the Ellen Essex Group, Improving Health, Academic Achievement, and Well-Being for Students. It's a 5-year grant. It was an application by Ellen's area to solicit this new grant money to help a district. It's a very high priority district. They had to have a certain rubric that they used. The selected PSU happens to be Vance County Schools. They have to collaborate with it for the program and focus efforts in at least 75% of their schools over this period to increase health and wellness and the well-being for those students. So we're excited to have that new money and be able to get that out to these schools. And the last 2 items are actually bringing back around CARES Act 1 money for Gear 1 and Gear 2. We've had conversations with the governor's office. They are working with US Ed to receive a late liquidation allocation permission for us to reauthorize these funds out so that they do not revert to the federal government. US Ed wants to make sure all these funds are spent and spent for students. So what we've done is we're providing amendments to those 2 GEAR policies. GEAR 1 is related to specialized instructional support, so think mental health. There's about $760,000 available to be redistributed there. And the Year 1 in the 170 PRC is for the tutor supplemental instructional services. There's about $460,000 thereabout that they would like us to be able to redistribute. So what we've done is amend those policies to help get us ahead of the curve for as soon as they receive permission from US Ed, we can get the funds distributed. We've done it the same for both. What we're doing is recommending that we base the priority on those PSUs that did not revert the original funds. So PSUs that actually spent both those PRC grants in full as a priority. We're going to use the SAPE poverty index that we use for federal funds and reporting to rank those. And then we will, because it's not a lot of money, we're going to then try to establish who has money expenditures that they had during that time. That's the key wrinkle. It can't be new expenditures. It has to be expenditures that were already expended by the period of performance, which is September 22. So they had expenditures in other local or federal grants that they can repurpose into these redistributed funds. That frees up those other funds for those districts and fully expends these funds. And so that's the proposal before you for that. We anticipate once we have permission, the schools would be able to execute this within 60 days so that we can then get these grants effectively closed out with the governor's office. So those are our allotment policy amendments for this month.
All right, questions or comments on these items of funding through allotments? All right, not hearing any, let's go on then to our next item, and thank you, Jennifer Bennett, who will be back, as will Dr. Mark Sandberg, who's now coming back for an ESSER 3 funding request. This pertains to a position that the state board approved on March of 2022. I'm sure all of us remember it well, with ESSER 3 funds, and it was for an IT project portfolio manager. Unfortunately, it's been very hard to fill that position, and it has not been done to this point, and we'd like to reclassify the funds in order to use them meaningful in a place where they're needed, to a project, from a project manager to an IT accessibility specialist, effective as of July 1st, 2023, and Dr. Sandberg will tell us why we need to do this.
Yes, sir. So with the increase in digital materials, there comes a need to make sure that all citizens in North Carolina have access to those materials, whether it's captioning like we do with this meeting, or accessible resizable text, whatever the case may be. So the purpose of this position is to provide that support for the agency, so to help us review the materials we're putting out, the applications we're purchasing, services we're offering to ensure that they are accessible. And then also to provide training and support and consultation to our PSUs as well. So we do this right now as a patchwork. So we have digital teaching and learning does some of it, EC does some of it, and IT does some of it. So the purpose is to consolidate this all under one umbrella and offer it as a service, both within the agency and to our PSUs.
Questions or comments about this redirection, if you will? Not hearing any. Thank you, Dr. Sandberg, but don't go away. Our next item is, and last item on the action on first read, is Biz Op 4, which is an RFP approval for the fiscal year 24 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act 21st Century CCLC Competitive Summer Grant Funds. Susan Brigman is here.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Talked to us about this last time, and we now have it ready for action.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I want to personally thank you for meeting with me individually to kind of brainstorm and go through this actual grant that we have been awarded some extra funding for, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It was actually signed into law by President Biden on June 25th, 2022, and it included $1.4 million in additional funds for 21st Century Community Learning Center grants. And so for the purpose of this particular grant, we are using these funds to foster safer, more inclusive school environments, as well as support evidence-based practices intended to increase attendance and engagement of students, especially those in middle and high school. Eligibility for this particular version of 21st Century, this one was only open to our current grantees, so our cohort 15 and 16 sub-grantees.
We based this decision on new regulatory guidance that was issued by U.S. Department of Ed concerning summer grant programs that we offer through 21st Century. They are now proposing that we will have to provide those types of grants for 3 consecutive years, and because this pot of money is only $1.4 million and it does expire in September of 2024, we were not able to run this for 3 consecutive years. So it will only be open to current grantees. Let's take a look at the program focus. It is a little bit different from what you typically see with 21st Century. So for us to keep in alignment with what these funds are intended to provide, we are hoping to seek to fund summer intensive programs that are designed to improve students' access to innovative learning strategies that focus on reducing that chronic absenteeism and increasing student engagement in learning. And so for the purposes of this grant, we define summer intensive programs as comprehensive, consecutive 2 to 3 week targeted interventions that are designed to eliminate skill gaps, accelerate learning, ease the social transition, and or prepare participating students for success in the next school year. So with this grant competition, grantees can propose to serve certain types of students. And so if you take a look on the screen, you will see that there are 5 different options. So you can choose to provide services in one or even more of these focus areas. So the first one is kindergarten transition for rising kindergartners. So this would be for pre-K students that have just finished that type of programming and are going to enter kindergarten, and only PSUs can apply for this particular focus area. 5th grade to 6th grade transition, so this would be for rising 6th grade students. And then you could choose 8th to 9th grade transition for rising 9th grade students, or intensive tutoring that would be utilized to preview upcoming school materials or even credit recovery programs. And then the 5th one would be comprehensive mental health supports, which we've heard quite a bit about today. And that would involve hiring certified professional mental health staff to support students in developing social and emotional skills. So for this particular grant, the funding ranges are $25,000 to $150,000. And those would be based on the needs identified in the communities and the schools, the scope of the program, the proposed number of students to be served, and the program design. And what's good about us running this competition so early in the year is it will give these programs access to funds much earlier so that they can begin planning for summer. Because if you look at research, you should be planning for summer right now. And so with us being able to move as quickly as we can with getting this out to the field, we want to make sure that there's plenty of time to staff these types of programs. So organizations will be able to request expenses, reimbursement for expenses back to March 1st, 2024, all the way through September 2nd, 2024. So in the upcoming year, they would be able to request funding to help cover these expenses from March until September. On the next slide, you'll see our funding ranges for FY24, and it's based on the number of students. You'll see that they all are 2 to 3 weeks with a minimum of at least 16 hours per week. You can do more than 16, but you have to operate at least 16 for 2 to 3 consecutive weeks. And the difference in the scale was determined by us using the Wallace Foundation Out-of-School Time Calculator, and that helped us develop these funding ranges based on how many students you're going to serve, the duration, and the physical location. So for priority points, as with all 21st Century grants, absolute priority must be given to programs who propose to serve students in Title I eligible schools. However, we can also offer competitive priority points. And for this particular summer enhancement grant, competitive priorities can be received for any applicant that is proposing to serve CSI and TSI schools. So you would receive 2 points if 100% of the identified feeder schools are designated as CSI. And you could receive an additional 1 point if 100% of the schools are a combination of CSI and TSI. You can also receive a competitive priority point for joint applications, meaning that you have an LEA and at least one public or private community organization that are submitting this application jointly. The two that are different, something that you've probably not seen in any of our other 21st Century grants, are the competitive priority points for school environment, which you can earn up to 3 additional points, and that mental health component has a 1 point associated with that. So just to give you some more information on the school environment priority points, on this next slide, you'll see that if programs are proposing to serve students in feeder schools with greater rates of chronic absenteeism, suspensions, whether it's short or long-term, expulsions, criminal acts, and or instances of bullying and harassment in their school environment when it's compared to the state of North Carolina. So we are looking at the data from the state school report cards. And so if you are proposing to serve schools that have at least 2 of those environmental characteristics occurring at a greater rate than the North Carolina as a state, you can get 1 point. If you have 3 of those, you can get 2 points. And if you meet 4 or more of those environment characteristics, you can receive a maximum of 3 points. And then the final priority point is given to applicants that propose to hire certified and qualified mental health professionals and or partner with qualified mental health service providers to employ certified mental health professionals to intentionally support the student's social and emotional well-being. And just as a note, there is no priority consideration that's going to be given based on region for this particular grant, because all of the grantees that are eligible for this funding have already been selected or been given priority based on their region in previous competitions. And so on the next slide, you'll see our grant competition timeline that we're proposing. We would like to release the RFP on Monday, September the 11th, if it's approved by the board. And we have TA sessions tentatively scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday of September 13th and 14th to provide technical assistance for this RFP. Then we would like to open for applications in CCIP, which is our grants management system, September 14th. And then subgrantees would have until Tuesday, October 31st to submit an application. Then we will plan to come back to the board in December with our recommendations for award so that we can begin our onboarding process after the first of the year and be able to have them submit their final budgets and any related documents that we need by early March so that we can get these funds pushed out as soon as possible. Are there any questions?
Any questions or comments? You can see this grant pulls together several subjects we've talked a lot about today, including absenteeism, whole child health, school environment. So this is a sort of unique opportunity. It's a different grant, and some different priority points have been applied, consistent with the subject matter of the legislation. So any questions or further comments on it? All right, not hearing any. Thank you, Ms. Brigman. That brings us to our first action item, and this is the policy amendment for the employees' benefit and employment policies and approval of proposed administrative rules for temporary rulemaking. We have spent a good bit of time on this in past discussions. Allison Schaefer and Dr. Tom Tomberlin are here. If there are any additional questions as we try to move to finalizing the points that are left. Dr. Tomberlin, don't be shy. Please come forward. Because one of the items, yours, may get a question or two.
I think we each have basically one slide, so
Yep.
Keep going. There you go. So, is that yours, Tom? That's yours.
Yes, this is just the benefits manual. You should have an updated version of this in your materials. There took us a little while to get the language all sorted out, but it's all reflecting the statutes related to this. This particular issue was one of the latest. Part-time employees do receive 8 or 4 weeks of leave. It is their salary that's prorated according to their the percentage of the full-time job that they serve. So originally it was they got 4 and 2 weeks, but the legislature corrected that, and this is reflected in the policy manual.
And the second item was a matter that had some questions from our teaching representatives about use of paid parental leave. Specifically, the language in here actually reflects the statutory requirement, so we don't have any choice but to implement them as stated in the law. So what happened was teachers are allowed to use personal days, but in the past, they've only been allowed to use personal days on student days if they paid for or were deducted a substitute amount. In the budget bill in 2021,
that was amended to allow for that the teachers do not have to provide or get docked the pay for a substitute if they give a reason for the for taking personal leave. It doesn't say what reason, it just says a reason. So that this actually reflects the statute as amended or added in November of 2021 and gives teachers actually more likelihood of not having to pay for a substitute. So so we would recommend that for approval.
So we appreciate the comments we got last meeting. It was a lively, good discussion, and so follow-up has been undertaken, and that's where we are. Welcome any additional comments or questions on either of these two items that Dr. Tomlin and Ms. Schaefer represented.
I have a quick question.
Please.
Kind of a what-if question. It's the last part of the policy. If no substitute is hired for a teacher, any substitute reduction shall be refunded to that teacher. I don't understand a situation like that.
If a substitute is not required, for example, I mean, I guess if a teacher assistant were able to manage the classroom and she's already on the payroll, for example. Pardon?
Teachers covered.
Teachers covered, right. If the another teacher covers it in a planning period or something. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Sometimes you can't find a sub, and so the principal goes in and shows a movie. Or I don't know what all happens, but that's pure speculation, and I'm not an educator. But
we have several subject matter experts right here.
I know I should have looked down here.
It just sometimes the sub isn't available. Sometimes other people will cover for that teacher, and if there's not out of pocket for the school, then the teacher will not have her.
So the refund is already in the.
The
deduction is already in the works. It was refunded after the fact.
Apparently, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Especially got classrooms.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. Thank you for the time that both of you have spent on these policies. I know it's been a significant investment of time. That now brings us to discussion on Biz Op 6, which is a report to North Carolina General Assembly on full-time equivalency of public school students, the annual report. Jennifer Bennett is back for this. This was originally on consent. It should be a relatively short explanation, but this is a topic that we discussed a lot last year in terms of trying to come to some agreed upon approach for how to identify FTEs, and so we thought it'd be appropriate for Ms. Bennett to give a brief overview of the report that's going in.
Sure. We did talk about it quite a bit last year. We had a whole study group to determine the formula. That was adopted by the board last January. And then we also had to issue a report for that first go-round. We're now on our annual report cycle. So our annual report is due every October to the General Assembly based on General Statute 115C-419. It requires us to provide an annual report for the number of students and their full-time equivalency of those students by public school unit and grade level from the prior school year. As we determined back when you approved the formula, we basically are using April as our timeline. We use that for a lot of headcount data, for a lot of other reporting. So we picked April. It has to be disaggregated by the PSU, by the course, and it's two basic reports. You have an annual summary report that is FTE by PSU by grade level, and then that report is then subsequently written out in the detail, which details it out by course, and the FTE by course. Please don't print anything. I hope you have not printed anything. It is well over 3,000 pages in the PDF form. We're advising against.
For all those asking, I did not print it.
Yeah, I should have. I'm going to put a disclaimer in the executive summary next year. Please don't print or print at your own risk. So it's due every year. It's compiled directly out of data already in the SIS, the Student Information System. We apply our formula to that, and we disaggregate the data and compile it in these massive PDF files that we provide over to the General Assembly. And that's our annual report. So I haven't had many comments after our first go-round of the 3,000-page report was provided. So we'll see what happens with the annual report and move forward from there.
And just to clarify by that, you mean you haven't received any comments back from
I have not
recipients of
received
the
any
report?
comments back from any of the people receiving the report or from the constituents out in the field, the superintendents or finance officers or those. And we haven't seen any subsequent legislation that's resulted out of this report at this time. So obviously we'd keep you informed if we do see any heightened activity.
Ms. Campbell?
I should probably know the answer to this, but what is the purpose of this report? I mean, is there some usefulness?
It's in law, and so we are required to do it.
We haven't seen evidence. We haven't seen evidence of its use to this point. We saw a good bit of consternation from the field about the process of how it was, how you would try to gather that information. It was a fair summary of the last year.
Say no more. Thank you.
I will let you know if we see how it may be being applied outside of the department.
And to anybody, if you take a look at the report without really looking at the report, but just sort of look at a couple of things, you'll get a good sense of what the report's doing pretty quickly. It doesn't take long.
Okay?
Thank
Any
you.
questions? Okay.
All right, BizOp 7 is, this is a right of entry and easement issue at another one of our schools. It's Duke Energy underground power line at the North Carolina School for the Deaf in Morganton. Nathan Mond is here to present, but the recommendation is to approve this easement. I'm sure we will have discussion about it, and I want to point out Nathan is the presenter of information. He is not the propounder of the request. So it's important that he can only answer but so many questions likely that and we may have some. As he knows, there are several questions that could be asked.
Yes,
Nathan, welcome.
Thank you. This is a request before you for discussion from Duke Energy by way of Department of Administration, State Property Office for, as Mr. Duncan said, a right of entry for construction and then a permanently granted easement at the North Carolina School for the Deaf in Morganton. The entire easement would route across 3 or 4. I'm still slightly unclear whether Western Piedmont Community College is going to have easement on their land or not, but the facilities affected are DHHS Broughton Hospital, DPI's School for the Deaf, possibly Western Piedmont Community College, sorry, and also the North Carolina School for the Science and Math, governed by the UNC General Administration. So it's a 20-foot wide underground power utility easement, about 7,000 feet in total length. 3.2 acres are involved. About half of that square footage, about half of that acreage, or 1.6 acres, would be impacted on the deaf school campus. They're seeking, as is required by General Statute 146, various sections of that require that this board approves any such request before it can be granted.
So, and I should say Vice Chair Blackburn and I have had some real discussions about this. There's no proposed payment for this easement. It's, as you just heard, 7,000 feet long, 20 feet wide. It's a very substantial amount of property. It also will require construction services all over our school, which is a school for special children who have special needs. Will require the cleanup of that. It will also require security measures with respect to whoever comes onto that property, which I don't know is written into the contract from what we've seen. Same issues to some degree we saw with the Governor Moorhead School, and probably even a little bit more given the size of the easement being requested. So we have sent back a request as to why there's not a payment feature. Duke Power is a company of some significant means. and it would seem appropriate that that would be a consideration for an easement of this size. So, so I don't know that Nathan can shed much light on that, but
What I do know at this point is that the DHHS granted their right of entry and easement, I believe in mid-July, sometime in July. I don't want to get pinned down on the date, but there was no payment provided there according to State Property Office. However, it's normally State Property Office, Department of Administration, who would, actually enter into negotiations for any such payment on behalf of any state agency, not just those involved here. So, still waiting on a few answers from them about the possibility of securing some exchange of value. But again, everyone should know that that would not remain with the campus or this agency under current state law. Those funds would be provided, reside with DOA.
I would suggest that one thing that would become extremely important is, by way of example, that the security concerns would be dealt with in any contract, which they were eventually in the Governor Moorhead contract, although DOA had not considered those. Those security concerns include running background checks, which is a costly endeavor, and that should not be paid for by the school for an easement that there's not a payment for. And we did at some points lobby and had in a bill that we, in fact, DPI would get the money from the sale of the easement in the Governor Moorhead School. That legislation got, my recollection, was caught up in a veto at some point, did not ultimately go through in the form that it was originally in, and then later passed in a different form this most recent session. But well, I'll just be frank, I have a lot of concerns with giving an easement of that size to Duke Power without a payment being made, and certainly not with all the attendant costs and administrative headaches that it's going to bring for the school and potential safety risk to the students. That's just one person, but I have real problems with that. Ms. Campbell.
In terms of the area that it's going to be disrupted, I'm assuming there's no buildings involved, but is it open space that the campus uses, or?
It's a combination of different conditions. Part of this new easement would coincide or be adjacent to existing easements. The majority of it would route to one side or another of paved roadways, regardless of which campus is impacted. But there are two areas on the deaf school campus where the proposed easement would cross open fields. Those locations have been coordinated with campus leadership. They have no objections to where they're positioned, where they're proposed to be. But I'm not sure that that's not worth further exploration, simply because it does create a permanent utility easement that would divide sections of unused land, open land, play fields, or areas with no particular designation at present, and could create an issue, a complication for further expansion or construction on that campus in the future. There are two locations like that on the deaf school campus. I don't see any similar concerns on the other affected campuses from what's being proposed at this time.
Well, welcome any other comments.
Do we have the right to say no? I mean,
We do. We have to vote yes for it to happen. Or we can, in having this discussion, we can send back a message that a number of things need to be done before we will say yes. Including, obviously, I think our lawyers will have to study and know the contract well in terms of whether or not it covers all the needs of the school, as basic as the security needs for our students as a starting point.
Can you remind us the total number of acres this affects, 1.4?
1.6 on the deaf school campus and 1.6 on the other campuses combined. So our campus is impacted with about half of the project. And the stated intent or benefit, if you will, is that this is a redundant infrastructure improvement that would offer redundancy to all of the areas in terms of utility outage or any eruption like that. There's no direct connection or improvement kind of benefit to our campus or the others for that matter. As I understand it, it's simply a utility infrastructure project.
But you know, Mr. Chairman, just quickly, a 20-foot trench, a bucket on a dig is just, it's not 20 feet. Why?
Right.
What in the world they burn? Triple cable. I mean, think about it, 20 feet.
That's,
And the bucket is only about 8 foot. Was I?
What I guess I don't understand is these are valuable resources for our school, and
That's a lot of land.
the manner in which this came to us is hard for me to understand, both in terms of looking out for our students first and foremost, and looking out for valuable state property and the usage of a company, Duke Energy, which is well equipped to be able to compensate for these kinds of easements as they do regularly.
Just a quick question, so and maybe you mentioned this earlier, but we dealt with an issue like this a few months ago, right?
Governor Morehead's report.
And so, the issues that are giving us pause right now, how are they resolved?
The resolution was,
paid?
ultimately, the contract had written into it protections for the students and requirements for identification for any workers. That got put into the contract. I'm not sure if we paid for any background searches on workers.
We would not have, but those requirements were placed upon that contract. And again, that was, just to add a little background, that was City of Raleigh requesting utility water line easement, and there was payment of, I believe, $250,000 for that one.
So that was a different.
But the payment did not go to us. It went
No.
to the Department of Administration, but there was a bill that would have had the payment go to us, which passed the legislature and then got caught up in a veto, so the payment did not ultimately come to us.
But a payment was a
Superintendent, did I have
provision.
that right? That's my recollection of how that bill, that the bill actually passed with the payment going to DPI, but then the bill did not ultimately get signed into law.
Well,
My recollection.
could we negotiate to have, are we too late to negotiate a contract? I mean, what we're asking.
We haven't signed anything, so no, it's never too late
Well,
if you haven't signed.
then there's the answer.
All right.
Part of it, anyway.
Do we have a general consensus we should explore this further and ask our council to be
Yes.
of assistance to Mr. Mon, who should not have to carry this ball by himself? Please.
I believe the last time when we did the Governor Moorhead provision, we did negotiate some safety provisions. I think that the Vice Chair said that. So we can still try to make sure that we have protections for students in there. Even if we don't get payment, we can certainly ask. But the property office is in control of what the agreement will be, and they generally negotiate it. So we can ask them to include certain things that, especially that are unique to children.
Good,
Well,
thank
and then
you.
the remaining question for us will be, in terms of the ongoing future use of the property, will this create an impediment to the use of the property? That will be the question we will still have to consider regardless of all else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, one more question.
Yes, sorry, Ms. Campbell.
There weren't objections by the folks who are running the school, or were there? Or have we
Apparently
asked
there
them?
were not.
They have no objections to the proposed route. Initially, they did a site walk with Duke Energy, and I'm not sure if State Property Office attended in person, but they revised the proposed route to their satisfaction based on current use of the site.
Yeah, that's the key, based on current
Right.
use of the site.
But not with continuing, just putting it down.
Right, that's our job.
Chair Davis.
So how much of the proposed easement is adjacent to an existing easement, and how much of it is going through property that has no easement on it now?
One of the attachments in your materials
Sorry.
is probably what I need to refer you
Then
to.
I'll go read that.
Yeah,
Got
it's
pictures.
Sorry.
it's pretty clear in there graphically, I think.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, we have then 4 consent items. The first one is a rules update on approval of permanent rule for the Remote Academy's hardware and software fees. Melissa Davis is here, but we have talked about that extensively. I don't think there's any further questions we've got on that. Does anyone have one? All right, Biz Op 9 is report to the North Carolina General Assembly to ensure security of student records. This, of course, is an important report. Diane Delaney, she's the director of the Office of Data Reporting and Privacy, to obviously make sure that we can report on an annual basis about the safety of and security of these materials. Are there any questions on that? Nothing out of the ordinary about this report from its normal approach. Biz Op 10 is report to the General Assembly. This is my favorite one, actually. Annual Agency Mobile Communications Device Report. Dr. Sandberger's here if there are any questions, but we now get a report, for example, on the superintendent's cell phone and other such pressing items. So it's a required report, and we certainly want to comply fully, and we have. Biz Op 11 is the professional certification for North Carolina school finance officers. And happy to report we have two, one in Cabarrus County and one in Bertie County. We have updates on contracts. Any questions on the executed contracts report and the planned contracts report, either one? All right, not hearing any. The last thing we have is the monthly budget report, which you had a chance to review. If there are any questions on that, now would be the time to ask. And I would say it would be helpful as we look at the monthly budget report for next month. I've heard from 2 or 3 members that it would be helpful as we close down ESSER 3 over the course of the next month, ESSER 2, that we get an update just on how smoothly that's going and the status of that. I think we've gotten a couple of good updates already, so just a quick update next time in terms of where that is. People were interested. And with that, we're done.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. That concludes our open session agenda for the day. We will not be returning after closed session to open session, but we will be reconvening tomorrow, September 7th, promptly at 9 a.m. This time I ask for a motion to go into closed session. Vice Chair Duncan.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318.11, A1, 3, and 6, and to prevent the disclosure
I make that
of
motion,
information.
Treasurer Falwell.
That is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute Sections 115C-319 and -321 and 132-6.1C et sec. To consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including a discussion of the following pending cases: Phillips versus NCDPI, Brown versus NCDPI, Morris versus NCDPI, Minnick versus North Carolina State Board of Education, Hall versus Lyles et al., Henderson versus North Carolina State Board of Education and North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and In Re Bridges Academy.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second?
Second by Treasurer Falwell.
Any discussion? Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz.
Yes.
Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull.
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn.
Yes.
Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell. Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chairman Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Let's be in closed session at 3:30.